Okay, so here is part 2 of our section 2 day 1 notes. We are now going to graph absolute value functions and talk about the transformations. So notice the absolute value function, the general equation, it is y equals a times the absolute value of x minus h plus k. A, h, and k can affect our graphs. Remember, the parent function is just y equals absolute value of x. Our vertex is going to consist of h and k. H is going to be the opposite of what you see, and K is going to be exactly as you see it. Axis of symmetry, or we say AOS, is going to be X equals H. So whatever the H value is, that's going to be your axis of symmetry. Now, if our graph opens up, that is when A is greater than 0, so it's positive. If our A value is negative, then it opens down. When it opens down, that's what we call a reflection. So that is our key word, and make sure you write that down, because you will have to use these vocabulary words, okay? Now, if the graph is wider than the parent, that means the absolute value of A is less than 1. So that just means a half, a third, 3/4. What we call this is a vertical shrink, okay? So that is your key word there, vertical shrink. And make sure you have that down because we are going to use that vocabulary word quite a bit. And then when absolute value of A is greater than 1, so that's of course 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, the graph is narrower. And what we call that is a vertical stretch. So make sure you write these key vocabulary words down because we will be using them when we talk about transformations of an absolute value function, okay? So let's go ahead and let's do our first example. So for the functions below, we're going to complete the following. So A, we're going to state the vertex. So for example 2, we have y equals negative absolute value of x plus 3 minus 4. So vertex, remember that's your h and k. So our h is going to be inside the absolute value bars, k is going to be the outside. Now remember, h is going to be the opposite of what you see. So though we see x plus 3, really that's going to be negative 3. And then k is exactly as we see it, so that's going to be negative 4. Okay. Now these describe the transformation. So notice the words we use. We're going to have to use translations, reflections, stretches, shrinks. Okay. Now, when we do this, order kind of matters. So we actually want to start with reflections if there are any. To know if there's a reflection, we have to see if our A value is negative. Well, we do see a negative sign in front of our absolute value, so that means we do have a reflection. Now, no, though we don't see a number, that is going to be 1, so we have a negative 1. So what we're going to say is we are going to have a reflection. And you do need to state over what? We're always going to state over the x-axis. Okay, so when you do this, I would say always write the reflection if there is one first, so you can say over the x-axis. If you do not do that and you go out of order, then you're not reflecting correctly. Okay, now we can talk about if we have any vertical stretch or shrinks. Well, notice that our A value, let's take the absolute value of it. So absolute value of negative 1 is just 1. So since it's not greater or less than 1, we don't have any vertical stretches or shrinks. So we're kind of good for there. The next thing are going to be translations. So which way you're going to translate? Now here, remember if we have a plus h, that really means that we're going to translate left. So I'm going to use that word, translate. Make sure you use that vocabulary word. So translate, we're going to say left 3. And then we can say down 4. Because k is exactly as we see it. Okay? Okay, so from there, now we can graph our function. So how we're going to graph is we're going to take our vertex first. So negative 3, negative 4. Let's plot that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use the A value as our slope, okay? So the A value can represent slope. So negative 1 means that we're going to go down. So we go from our vertex, we go down 1, and then we're going to go to the left. Down 1 to the left, down 1 to the left. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're going to go down one to the right one, down one to the right one, down one to the right one. And I would say kind of maybe plot 3 or 4 other points along with your vertex to create a good absolute value. And please do not forget the arrows on your absolute value function here. Okay, our last thing that we need to do is talk about domain and range. Now, notice that here, because of our arrows, we are going to hit all the negatives and positives on our x-axis. So that just means that our domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. If you don't already recognize that domain is going to be the same for all absolute value functions. So domain is always going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. Now let's talk about range. Remember, that is our y-axis, the vertical axis. Notice here, what is the highest value? Well, our highest value is going to be -4. Know that our graph is going down. That means we're going to the negatives forever. So remember, we write from least to greatest. So the smallest amount is negative infinity. And then we go to -4. And we use a bracket because it is included. We have a closed circle at the vertex. Okay, let's go ahead. We're going to do example 3. Now remember, if I'm ever going too fast, make sure you just pause the video and get the information down, and then you can listen later. Okay, what I would like you guys to do is go ahead and pause this video and try this next example, example 3, on your own. Okay, let's see what you got here. So for part A, we're going to state the vertex. So remember, vertex is your HK. H is the opposite of what we see. So though it says x minus 2, for that is going to be positive 2. K is exactly as we see it, so that's going to be a +1. Okay, part B is going to be our transformations. So we always want to see if we have a reflection first. If we look at our A value, there is no negative, so there's not a reflection. So we don't need to worry about it. But notice here, if we take the absolute value of A, it is greater than 1. So we do have a vertical something. So remember, since it's greater than 1, we actually have a vertical stretch. So we can say vertical stretch. And then we say of 3. So you want to indicate what is the number here, okay? So by what is the multiplier. Now we do the translations. So talk about the H. So we translate. We go right to. And then we go up 1. And you really only have to say translates once. So you don't have to say it twice. If you want to, you can. Okay, now part C is to graph. So this is what I got for my graph here. So I graphed my vertex of 2, 1. And then I noticed that my slope was 3. So I went up 1, 2, 3, and I went to the left 1. 1, 2, 3, went to the left 1. I did the same thing, 1, 2, 3, but also went to the right. Okay, notice it made a V shape, so we're all good to go there. And notice that it should be facing up because our A value is positive. Okay, our last thing is to be the domain and range. Okay, remember, domain deals with the x values. Know that it should always be negative infinity to positive infinity. And then our range, okay, that is going to depend on our vertex and at which way our graph is opening. So notice here that we have our vertex at 2, 1. So we start at 2, but because it's opening up, that means it goes on forever in the positive direction. So we do bracket 2 because it is a closed circle, and then positive infinity. And with any infinity signs, we use a parentheses. Okay, let's go ahead and do our last example, example 4. So here, we don't have a graph. That's okay. So it just says state the vertex and describe the transformations you would use to graph the function. Then we're going to state the domain and range in interval notation. Okay, so we really don't need to create a graph when we are figuring out the vertex and the transformations. That's the nice part, okay? So let's talk about vertex here. Actually, what I would like you to do is go ahead and pause the video and just determine the vertex and the transformations. So go ahead and do that. Okay, let's see what you got. So remember, we have H and K. H is the opposite of what we see, so since we see +1, that should be -1. So we don't see a K, that's going to represent 0. Okay? Okay, let's talk about the transformations. If we look at our A value, notice that it is negative. So we need to talk about the reflection first. So we have a reflection over the x-axis. Make sure anytime you have a reflection, you write that first. Otherwise, you're not going to have it correct. Okay, now let's talk about if there's any vertical stretch or shrinks. Now we do need to take the absolute value of this -2. So we take the absolute value of it. It is +2, which is greater than 1. That means we do have a vertical stretch. And mixture of 2. Notice I didn't put -2 because we want the positive. It's the multiplier, multiplying by that 2. Okay, so it's a vertical stretch of 2. Now we talk about translations. So I translate, looks like left 1. And then we don't go up or down. Okay, last things we need to talk about is the domain and the range. Okay, domain should be very easy because for all absolute value functions, no matter what, it is -infinity to +infinity. Now let's think about the range. If you need to, you can actually draw a sketch of this graph if you want to. So we can think of, okay, I have this, I can go to -1, right? And then point that and know that I'm going to go down because my A value is negative. So if we think about it, our highest Y value is going to be at the vertex, -1. And then our lowest is going to be -infinity because our graph opens down. So I have parentheses, -infinity to -1, and then don't forget your bracket. Okay. So, hey guys, I just realized I made a mistake. For the range, it shouldn't be -1 because that's our X value. It should actually be 0 because that's our Y value. So let me restate that again. So for range, we do go from -infinity, but it actually should be 0 because that's the Y value. -1 is the X. That was my fault. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So if you do have any questions about any of the absolute value functions, make sure you contact me so that I can be through email or Google Meet. I will see you guys later. Bye.